Hi everyone, it's Jennifer McGuire for Hero Arts. Lately, die cutting has become just as popular as stamping in the card making world, so I thought I'd show you one way that you can stretch your dies and get more out of them. So if you look at this piece here, it looks like a gold medallion kind of piece. I created that using the new Hero Arts Blooming Flower die. So it doesn't look anything like a flower. It's a great way to kind of stretch it and give it a new look. So here is a look at the Blooming Flower die from Hero Arts. I love how intricate it is. So what I'm going to do is cut this 4 times. I'm going to put it down on a piece of cardstock face down in my Big Shot, and I'm going to put a scrap piece of cardstock on top just to act as kind of a shim as we put this intricate die through your die cut machine. It depends on your machine whether or not you need that shim, but I like to do it to make sure it cuts all the way through. So I've cut 4 blooming flowers here, and you can see I have all these little pieces in here still. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and glue 2 of them together, just using my favorite adhesive, and then I'm going to go ahead and pop the pieces out of the 2. By putting the 2 together, I'm just saving myself time. Instead of popping them all out of one and then popping them all out of the other, I'm just doing them all at once. Now with the other 2, I'm going to glue them together and pop out the pieces also. I could have put all 4 together, but I thought it might be kind of tricky to push through all 4 of them with those little holes. It might have worked, but I wanted to be sure, so I just did 2 and then 2, and then I'm going to go ahead and glue the 4 together. So basically I went from a thin die cut and I built it up so that it's like a thick embellishment because it's 4 pieces thick. It really makes a difference in kind of turning your die cut into from a piece of paper into a standalone embellishment. Now for my design, I decided to cut this guy in half, so I'm just using some good scissors just to cut straight across the center. It really doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to add to this, and it'll kind of cover up if you didn't do it perfectly. So now I wanted to make this look like a metallic kind of medallion on my card, so we're going to cover it heavily with embossing powders, and we're going to use silver and gold embossing powders on the pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and get everything ready here. I have my silver embossing powder. Here I have my gold. I don't use my gold as much, that's why it's in its original container. And I have a little spoon, and I think those little spoons really make a big difference in not using as much powder. I have my Versamark ink pad, and I'm going to take half of my medallion and press it face down into Versamark ink just to cover it completely with Versamark ink, and I'm also going to try to cover the sides as much as I can. It really doesn't need to be perfect. Now once I've covered it entirely with the Versamark ink, I'm going to take my tweezers and hold them with tweezers. You could adhere this to a piece of scrap paper and go from there, but I think these tweezers are great. They kind of clamp onto it. Now I'm going to dip it into my silver embossing powder. You can see some of it gets on the back. That's fine. Doesn't bother me a bit, and that helps to make sure that some of the embossing powder gets on the sides of the embellishment that we've created here. So I'm using my Hero Arts heat gun to melt this away, and you'll see that it looks a lovely silver at first. But I wanted to really make this look like an embellishment as opposed to just paper covered with embossing powder. So I want to put more embossing powder on it. So what I'm going to do is add another layer. Now there are 2 ways you could do this. You could let this cool and dip it back onto your Versamark ink pad and then add more embossing powder. But another trick is to get it really hot so that that powder on your medallion is very hot, and then dip it back in the powder, and the hot embossing powder, the melted embossing powder, will stick to the additional embossing powder you put on. So now I have 2 layers here, and I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit more on some parts, and you can see that you're starting to really cover all of that layered die cut piece with the metal, and it really looks quite cool. So now I have my silver done. I'm going to heat it up so it's nice and hot and quickly sprinkle on some gold powder, just a little bit here and there, and then heat it up again. Again, if you don't want to worry about moving fast enough to add powder while it's still hot, you could let it cool and put on more Versamark ink instead. So there you can see there's a mix of gold and silver on it, and once it cools, it looks like a great standalone embellishment. So now I'm going to do the same thing with the other half. I'm going to go ahead and show you again just so you can see it in action. I covered it completely with Versamark ink, including the sides and a little bit of the back. I'm going to go ahead and melt that silver embossing powder. Sorry, my camera is having trouble focusing on this intricate die cut. And again, at first, it has a light layer of silver, which really doesn't do a whole lot. It's when you add the additional layers that it really starts to look like a really cool embellishment. It looks like a metal embellishment. So now this is really good and hot. I'm going to take it and dip it in again and get another layer. Your second layer doesn't have to be perfect. It kind of adds to the character. And some of this powder will kind of pour over the edges, so the edges look nice and smooth too. While it's hot, I'm going to shake on a little bit of gold here. I love using the spoon. You could also use the end of a straw. for controlling how much powder you put down. And you see when you heat this, you get just a little bit of gold kind of swirled in there with the silver, and I love having those two mixed together. So now that I have my two halves done here, I want to put a stamped greeting right through the center. So I dug through all my stamps, and I actually found a stamp set that's an older one from Hero Arts, but I really like the font on it. And I decided that I wanted to actually just use the word thank you, not thank you for everything. So I'm going to cut my stamp apart. This is totally okay to do with clear stamps. You can always mount them as they were originally intended. So I'm just going to take my scissors and carefully cut between the thank you and the for everything. This won't harm your stamps, don't worry. You can always use them as originally intended. And now I just have the thank you by itself. So I want to position this onto a piece of white cardstock. I'm going to go ahead and glue down my medallions first. I want to make sure they're straight, so I'm using my 2-ruler to make sure. And I've just put some regular adhesive on the back of these pieces and glued them down. I might go back and squirt some glossy accents under there to make sure it stays put once I'm done. So now I have enough room here for my greeting. I'm going to go ahead and ink it up with Versamark ink once again, and I decided to use the gold embossing powder on this. Since I have a lot of silver on the pieces that we created there, I thought it'd be fun to have more of the gold on the sentiment. So I'm going to go ahead, use my little spoon here, and sprinkle it on to the sentiment. And then go ahead and heat it up, and that works perfectly. By the way, those spoons, you can get them on Amazon, but you get like 1,000,000 of them. If you want to, just go to an ice cream shop. You have permission to get some ice cream so that you can get a little sample spoon, and you really only need one. So now I wanted to do a metallic edge, a trim to my card. So if you look around the edge there, we have some metallic that matches the embellishment we made. So I just have a Hero Arts white note card here, and I'm just smushing a little bit of Versamark ink around the outside edge. It doesn't matter how nice it is because we're going to cover up most of the middle. So I'm going to go in with some of my silver embossing powder and sprinkle some on in various places. I'm using, again, mostly silver, and then I'll go back and add in a few splashes of gold here and there. This mixing of powders is a great way just to get more out of the powders that you have, and you can create your own. You can mix colors. You can do all kinds of things. Now, if you notice, I don't really worry about getting much of that gold back into the container because I'm not wasting a ton by using that little spoon. Then you don't have to mess with trying to save it all. I kind of went overboard on the foam tape on the back of this because I wanted to make sure it laid nice and flat. I don't know. You don't need that much. And I'm going to go ahead and add that to the center of my card, and there we have the trim that perfectly matches the embellishment. So there is one way you can take a simple die cut, layer it all up, cover it with embossing powders, and give it a completely different look. Just another way to stretch the products that you probably already have. If you're interested in any of these products or checking out some of the other new products from Hero Arts, be sure to head over to theheroarts.com and check out their blog also. Thanks so much for stopping by, and we hope to see you in another Hero Arts video.